He says, we've seen so far that if we're going to take reason seriously, we're justified to question both sense perception and reason. So that's what we saw previously, right? That we have reason to believe, if we're good skeptics, which is, an atheist should be a good skeptic, right? That we have reason to believe that we should take perception, how we perceive the world, and reason. We need to take skepticism about those things seriously. And so here's the next issue, right? He says, but even if we can't support the reliability of our cognitive faculties with faculty-independent arguments, right? In other words, our cognitive faculties would be our perception and our reason. If we have to support reason with reason, which is a circular argument. We have to support perception only with perception, which is a circular argument. So those are not good ways to support those things. Yeah. So he says, but even if we can't support the reliability of our cognitive faculties, reason and perception, with faculty-independent arguments, there's something we can do.
Okay.
Yay! Yeah. Right? So here it is. We can at least work toward a coherent story of perception and reason, right? That is a story that provides soothing relief for all of our skeptical discomfort, however sober such skepticism may be. And so he says what we need then is an explanation of how humans came to have reliable cognitive contact with the world. If we can do that, then maybe we can get around the issues of the circularity of perception and reason, right? If we can have a good explanation about how we came to know these things. Now, what he says here is kind of interesting. He says, for explanations, we can't step outside of the explanation to check if the explanation, is correct. Yeah. And so the only thing that we can do is to see, do we have a coherent explanation? So he makes a distinction here, and this is kind of interesting. These are kind of theories of truth that he's getting at here. He makes a distinction between a correspondence theory, right, where how do I know that this perception corresponds to reality? He says we can't. We have to be skeptical about that, right? But the other issue is coherence. Do my beliefs, do my ideas fit together without contradiction? Maybe if we can get a set of coherent ideas and belief that fit together without contradiction, that'll give us some a way to, at least justify to a certain extent these particular issues that we're struggling with, perception and reason, right? So he says, let's see if we have a coherent explanation, one that fits together without contradiction, right? Now he says Hume didn't have one, right? He didn't have an explanation.
Yeah, he was good at knocking down the pins, but couldn't stand anything else back up.
Right. So today he's going to suggest we have, evolution as an explanation, but Hume didn't have that. He wrote about a century prior to Darwin, right? So he says, other than the truism that we'd be dead if our cognitive faculties weren't dependable, right? There wasn't much an unbeliever could say to explain why such faculties are reliable. But, no, it's no longer the case. Darwin has come to the day. He's the atheist savior. In fact, Darwin has now given unbelievers everywhere an all-natural explanation for the dependability of our sense and reason, is what he says. In fact, he quotes Richard Dawkins here. He suggests that Richard Dawkins says, has notably said that it's finally possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist thanks to Darwin. So Darwin comes today. Darwin's explanation gives us now a coherent way to see that perhaps our faculties are reliable, our sense perception and our reason, right? All right, so what is the Darwin explanation? Well, first of all, he wants us to see at least there's two kinds of evolution with regard to what he calls our wetware, right? Our mental capacities, right? So the first issue that we have to question is, he says there's two separate issues: the origin of life and then the evolution of life, right? Where did life come from? And then from wherever it came from, how did it get to where it is today?
Right. So how did it start? And then once it started, how did it continue to improve and gain information, and then finally from the Princess and the Frog or the Frog Prince to, the actual prince.
Yeah, right. And so he says in the case of life's origins, the starting of it, the question is, how did lifeless matter come alive? He says in the case of life's evolution, the question is, once life appeared, then in its simplest form, how did it get greater and greater with regard to complexity? Right. Evolution proper, he suggests, addresses only the second question, right? The former question, he says, is a lot more difficult.
Right.
No duh.
Right? It rained on the rocks for millions of years. Lightning struck it, and then ooze happened, and amino acids, and then they came together somehow. Maybe. Right.
So what he said, and exactly that, or something like that. So he says, life then is a freak accident. Therefore, so too is it would seem then, if that's the case, maybe our cognitive faculties are freak accidents, right? In fact, he says some folks, this is a bit hard to believe, which brings us to the point of this chapter. If this all-natural explanation is correct, then there's reason to doubt the reliability of our cognitive faculties, or else doubt the claim that life arose naturally, right? So either we doubt that they're reliable, but if they're reliable, maybe then we would doubt that they arose naturally. Mm-hmm. So right, either or there, right? So let me just go over that again, all right? The all-natural evolutionary explanation, if it's correct, he says, then there's reason to doubt the reliability of our cognitive faculties, because all of this came about by accident, a freak accident, or else doubt the claim that life arose naturally. So either reliability or naturally, he's suggesting it's going to be difficult to have both.
Right. So like the tornado in the junkyard, it spins around, and at the end of it, there's a plane. Yeah. A working plane. Well, okay.
And we get on it, then do you want to ride on it?
Well, it's already been through one windstorm. Yeah. So how likely is it to have happened? And so if an atheist, if anyone were to look at that and go, okay, clearly you can claim that a tornado spun it around and out popped an airplane, but what is the likelihood of that happening? So small that mathematicians would label it as zero. Mm-hmm. So why is it when we come to life, here's the same type of, this has to happen, and not only for an organism, but for every preceding organism leading to the most complex of all organisms, which I think is the fern. Actually, it has more chromosomes than we do, or something like that. So how do you get all these different types out of a single cell, or the raining on the rocks, and it doesn't seem like any of that could happen. So how come we don't have the same type of skepticism for that as we do the airplane?
Yeah, good. And so now he wants to talk to. So evolution is the story. He wants to talk to us about. Does that overcome the skepticism that he's been dealing with? Right? This common sense skepticism.
So should we be skeptical of evolution? The problem of prohibitive probabilities doesn't so much arise if theism is true, right? So if we kind of believe that God exists, if we wanted to take a guided theistic of evolution, that's kind of easy. If you have an all-powerful God, he can make the jukes and the jive. He can mix the batter together when it needs to be. But if atheism is true, that unguided principle of it, it's really hard to figure out how that comes about.
Right.